I'll give you an analogy. So you can have the best surfer in the world, which is a great founder. You can have the best board in the world, which is a great product. But if you don't have a wave, you can't go anywhere. And so it really is all about that market that you're investing in and that pull effect that's happening. So that whether that's technological, geographical, economic, political, generational, it could be any reason that that inflection point is happening. But that is first and foremost.
Ladies and gentlemen, today my guest is Max Altucher, and I'm sorry, Max, if I just butchered that, but he's a pioneer in figuring out the go-to-market space and one of the most influential voices in modern sales. I had the chance to work with Max for several years while at Outreach because Outreach acquired Sales Hacker, which he was the founder of, and he built from the ground up and, as I mentioned, later sold to Outreach. Now he's currently the managing partner at GoToMarketFund, where he invests in and advises the next generation of go-to-market companies. Here's what really fascinates me about Max, which is his ability to spot winning companies early and his practical, no-nonsense approach to building successful businesses. As one of the first employees at Udemy, he changed their entire sales process by implementing strategies like leveraging overseas talent before it was the cool thing to do, something that was definitely far from practice at the time. He's also authored 3 influential books that have helped shape the modern sales practices. So, Max has an incredible track record by identifying and investing in category-defining companies early on. Now, he was an early investor in Outreach, in Gong, and numerous other successful startups. So, his approach to evaluating these companies isn't just theoretical either. It's rooted in years of hands-on experience building and actually scaling businesses. Now, in this episode, we're going to deep dive into Max's journey from his early days at Udemy to building Sales Hacker and his current role as a VC. Yes, he's went to the dark side, y'all. Now, we're going to explore his framework for identifying winning companies, his thoughts on the current state of go-to-market strategies, and his unique perspectives on building sustainable businesses in today's very tough market. So, whether you're a founder looking to scale your company, a sales leader wanting to stay ahead of the curve, or an investor interested in spotting the next big thing, I guarantee you'll walk away from this conversation with valuable insights and practical strategies you can apply to your own work. And if you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it in your own favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes, and it will help the podcast tremendously. So with that, I bring you Max. What's up, Max? Nice to see you, man.
Good to see you. I gotta center this. I haven't done it like twice.
Oh, are you in Arizona right now? Oh, the spot looks amazing, dude.
I don't know why this isn't centered though. This is so weird.
It looks good.
Ish. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, it looks good, man. So how's the spot treating you, man? You got the putt in there. Awesome. You got the
guys outside actually right now building all the kids stuff. Like there's a zip line for the kids, like a little we put like a playground instead of like a play set, we put a full playground in the backyard. So that's fun. But all's good. Am I in the right place? Is this the right link I was supposed to go to?
Okay. Yeah, dude, Riverside. We're in Riverside. So yeah, we're recording. I think we're good, man. Yeah, so dude, good. I just caught up with Wes and Gordon actually, funny enough. Right before us. They're doing good. They're about to launch their new product, so I think they're doing the. I don't know if you've talked to them or not
pivot.
on
I think that space. It's like they'll go up against Qualified, which I think is a tough competitor to go up against. Like they're smart people and good GTM. I like Wes and Gordon a lot. I think Spot was a tough place to be.
Yeah,
but I like this business better for them, and I like them a lot. They're great people.
Yeah, they're killer, dude. And I think so we'll see. I think Qualified's leaning heavy on Salesforce, right? Because they're in the Salesforce ecosystem. So I wonder if I told them, I was like, dude, maybe there's a play there for you guys to go all in on like the HubSpot ecosystem too.
Yeah. I mean, both.
Right? Because Qualified's not touching HubSpot.
There's plenty of room there for both.
Yeah.
You got to build a really great product. But the HubSpot ecosystem is a good ecosystem to go after too.
Yeah, so we'll see, man. I think I've been playing around with both because we've been, building our integrations, and I mean, HubSpot's come a long way, dude. It's like it's pretty legit now. Like I'm like, and they've kind of got all these crazy upsells and stuff that are annoying. But but I'm super bullish on HubSpot as a product. I think long term versus at least for SMB, right? Like I think people naturally in the past, as you know, they were like, okay, we're just gonna like use HubSpot for a year, then transition to Salesforce. I think that transition time is gonna be
Yeah.
a lot longer
Well, let's get into it.
for them. So I
I
don't know.
got Manny.
Yeah, let's get into it. Let's get
Manny's
into it.
calling me in
Um,
45 minutes. The guy,
who is?
Manny.
Oh, is he? Where? Oh, yeah. We'll talk about that later. We can talk about that. But yeah, man. Manny, I haven't talked to him in a while. But yeah, let's get into it, dude. So, long story short, I got 3 questions. We'll kind of just dive into these 3 questions, and then like we'll just jam. That's typically we keep it super conversational, right? So, all right. Well, let's dive into the first one. So, for those that don't know, Max is kind of the OG, one of the OGs of the GTM space. I think you wrote. What was the first book you wrote, Max? It was
Hacking
like
sales.
sales
Hacking
hacking,
sales.
hacking
Yeah, that
sales.
was the first one from kind of lessons I learned doing it at Udemy. So Udemy, eighth employee,
Yeah.
first person focused on the sales side of the business. Did some really hacky stuff. Leveraged virtual assistants in the Philippines to be our SDRs. Built a Google Docs of if-then statements. Leveraged early sales engagement platform called ToutApp in our
Yeah, I
leverage
remember.
that. So my
TK.
face was plastered on that website, helped them with a lot of their feature set, and then ended up being an early investor in Outreach because, met Manny. The machine was a big believer in Manny, and they were building a lot of things that I thought Tout should be building, but kind of decided not to, and so invested early, pre-seed into Outreach, and became a big Outreach supporter. But yeah, I wrote the book Hacking Sales. Then wrote another book called Career Hacking, focused on kind of millennials coming into the workforce and kind of
Mhm.
figuring out their own way. My journey was, I'd say, as unorthodox as you can get. So how to do it differently when you don't have kind of an Ivy League background or a pre-established network or family friends or money or whatever it was. And then third book I wrote was Sales Engagement, which I wrote with Manny and Mark at Outreach, defining the sales
Mhm.
engagement
Mhm.
category and kind of the processes and kind of modern ways of doing things there.
Mhm. And it's the one thing that you were early on that was that you're way early on, which is now a trend, which is hiring overseas
Mm-hmm.
talent. Right? You were big on that. Like I think in your first book, you were like, "Hey, we're gonna hire in the Philippines." And you're doing all this, and when I first saw that, I was like, "What? Like, why would you do that?" Like the U.S. And then like when I became a business owner, I started to realize like, okay, well, we can get great, we can get just as good as work and pay a third or even more or less of the
I was
cost, right?
building
And
sequences and AI agents before sequences and AI agents existed. I just used them with $4 an hour Filipino virtual assistants and if then statements on
mhm.
Google Docs and ToutApp, right? So like I kind of hacked together a bunch of the things that came a couple years later and were made technologically possible, in the coming years. Now here we are a decade later, and a lot of the stuff still endures. It's just, I think, I've said this before, like tech is a magnifying glass. So if you have rat shit, it becomes elephant shit. It's like what you put in
Yeah.
dictates what's going to come out the other side, what the outcomes are going to be. And if you've got a really bad process, it's just going to get even worse with technology. But if you have a great process, then it's going to be enhanced. It's going to scale.
Mm. So is that's a great lead into the first thing I want to talk with you about, which is like you're a pro at picking winning companies
Yeah.
early, right? You've always like you were early investor in Outreach, you were early investor in Gong or involved with Gong somehow. I'm not sure the details on that one, but obviously you started Sales Hacker, which was like I think what most people know you for, right? Which was the blog that then the media company I should say that sold to Outreach, right? And so what's your mental model or the thinking for how people should invest in a company or think, or even more importantly, join their next company on that's going to be a
Yeah.
winner?
I mean, I think you have to have an original thought in your head, and you have to be a student of the game if you're going to build like an enduring, exceptional career. So the first thing is like, where where are you getting your information? Are you learning? Are you listening to podcasts? Are you speaking to the right people? Like, are you kind of underwriting a thesis, so to speak, around where the world is going, and then putting yourself in the middle of that wave? So, for example, one of the things that we look for when investing is we want to invest in an industry or vertical where there is some sort of an inflection point, which means the market is being pulled. And so, like, good example of
Yeah.
that is we made an investment into Armada Systems. Armada System is building containerized portable data centers. So our belief is that Starlink is going to cover 70% of Earth's surface that didn't historically have Wi-Fi access in satellites to enable Wi-Fi. Now, if all of that surface is now Wi-Fi accessible, what other technologies is that going to enable? Well, if you have an oil rig in the middle of the ocean that couldn't get Wi-Fi previously, right? Couldn't get any kind of service, and now it
Yeah.
can. You can put a data center on that oil rig that in real time is going to be able to understand and analyze the data that's happening on the oil rig and give you outputs around that, right? Tell you what you need to do with that data. Um,
Yeah.
there's That's an example of a technological inflection point that's happening that opens up an area of investment. Another example of that, you're seeing Microsoft, Google, Facebook, this emergence and resurgence of nuclear. And if you think that that is going to continue, then there
Mhm.
are a lot of businesses that are being built in those areas that you should be investing in, right? So one of the investments we have is Control Rooms, which does sensors for nuclear power plants, petrochemical, et cetera. Same thing could be said for, you know, I'll give you an analogy. And this is an analogy I've taken, I think Mike Volpe was the originator of this, but it's the best way of putting this that I've heard. This is what we subscribe to when we invest. So you can have the best surfer in the world, which is a great founder. You can have the best board in the world, which is a great product. But if you don't have a wave, you can't go anywhere. And so it really is all about that
Yeah.
market that you're investing in and that pull effect that's happening. So that whether
Mm.
that's technological,
Oh.
geographical, economic, political, generational, it could be any reason that that inflection point is happening. But that is first and
Mhm.
foremost. The second is the founder. The founder has to be a machine. I mean, that was one of the things I really loved about Manny was like you meet this person, you're like, okay, bull in a china shop. Like they'll break a couple,
Mhm.
plates and windows and stuff like that, but they're gonna make something happen, right? So we want somebody who's a
Mhm.
machine. Personally, like I'm the last person you'll hear from. My team will hear from on any given day, and the first person they'll hear from on the next day. Like I love that. I live and breathe
Mhm.
what I do. And that doesn't mean that I don't have a life outside of what I do, but this is a lifestyle
Mhm.
for me. This is not a job. I genuinely love this. I think you need to invest in people that think the same way. And,
Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
wake up every morning, like I get excited to do what I'm doing. I spend 2.5 hours with my kids every morning and make my family breakfast. I go through a whole routine with them, but like
Yeah.
I'm still able to like make sure that I'm on top of things when I come to work. So I think you want to invest in people who are absolute machines in what they do, um, and have some sort of unique insight or a why them to that problem that they're solving. So a good example of this would be like, if somebody came to us and said, "Hey, I'm looking to do a geospatial mapping company," and say, "Okay, like why?" And they're like, "Oh, I went through an accelerator
Mhm.
program, and
Mhm.
the person running the accelerator was like, this is a good idea." Probably not going to make that investment. But if you say that to us and you're like, "Oh, well, I built this from scratch at Uber and I'm bringing two of my team members with me," it's like, okay, that's really interesting. Like you have an unfair advantage in this space. So, those are kind of like the main things. And then the I'd say outside of that, what's really interesting about our fund is we have about 300 LPs who are all VP, C-level sales, marketing, customer success leaders. And they're really knowledgeable in both like their jobs to be done, which is, go to market, but also in the places that they've worked and sold before. So, we have people who've done go to market roles in CAD software businesses, in prop tech, construction tech, insure tech, in data ops, DevOps, fintech, you name it.
Mhm.
And so, like when
Mhm.
we have a deal in a space or a thesis in a space, we're able to validate that very thoroughly with our LP base and understand the
Mhm.
commercial viability of that space, of that product, of that approach in a way that I don't think many other firms can do the same way we do. So I think
Yeah.
that's something that we look at when we're sizing up businesses. Now, that's just us. If I were an individual using this to find a job or angel invest on my own, I think I would try to lean into what my strengths are in you know my career or my skill sets, and then use that to vet companies. So yeah, I do think you need to have some sort of
Mhm.
a thesis as an individual. Like, where do I think the world is going, and put yourself in
Yeah.
between that. I mean, there are a lot of people I speak to who are like, yeah, climate change is a big thing. All right, go work for Patch. Go. There's a lot of companies that are attacking
Yeah.
that. Like, there's probably a lot of money there, and you're going to help the planet, right? So like, great, if that's something you're passionate about, then use your marketable skills and go work for one of those companies.
Yeah, it's good that you say that because I always give people the same analogy, which is like, look at it's kind of similar to if you're a person looking to where to work next, not necessarily an investor looking for a looking in who to invest in next, but as an individual, I guess you're investing as well, right? You're investing your
It's
time
all
and
on
energy, which is
every.
worth
You
more
should
than
look at
anything.
every job you take, unless you're incredibly desperate. You should look at every opportunity as like,
Yeah,
should I spend my time here because this is where I'm going to make my money, right? Like, and it's where you're going
yeah,
to build your
yeah.
career. I had a buddy who was a cybersecurity sales rep, and he had done like two or three companies a row in that space, and he got a really good job offer from a company called WalkMe, and his company had just sold to Microsoft, and he was like now looking for something smaller again. And he's like, "Should I go take this job?" And I was like, "No, stay in cybersecurity." And he's like, "Why? This is a great offer." I'm like, "Because when one, the space is only going to get more hot and exciting. Like, this isn't going away. This is like future proof. Two, when people are hiring in that space and they look at a stack of AE resumes, if you have a track record in this space,
Hmm.
you're at the top of the pile. They want to hire
Hmm.
the best person from another company in that space. Like, if you're selling something um, in the CrowdStrike space, but you're like a sub-billion-dollar company, like, you probably want to hire CrowdStrike reps who come with an understanding of that space, a
Hmm.
relevant Rolodex of CISOs, like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So he ended up listening to my advice, and instead of just taking this offer that he had, he went out and did a process and stayed in the space. And I think it's what's best for their career. But I think, like, if you're early in your career or any point in your career, you should be re-underwriting your kind of thesis around like, where is the world going, and then putting yourself between that opportunity, role in those companies, and ideally in one that's going to endure for a while. So like, by the 10th year in your career, you're the person to go to in that space.
Hmm.
You're the best hire. You're the number one.
Hmm.
And maybe that manifests as being like the first AE at a place. Maybe that manifests as being the CRO of, that the next Snowflake. And if you look at, like a Chris Degnan
Yeah.
at Snowflake, for example, like Dennis Leandris at Procore, like, there are a lot of situations where somebody's been hired at a lower level and then turns into the CRO, or, started their career in that sector and then
Yeah.
they get picked for that thing. So I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, it's that analogy you made, it was amazing. The analogy of like the best surfer in the world, the best board, but if there's no wave,
Mhm.
right? And like, so everyone needs to be looking for the wave and where the world's going. And little story, like when I joined Outreach, like as one of the early employees or whatever, I had just left Chile. I did like startup Chile. I built a solar thing because I was building solar tech because I was an electrical engineer. And when I built that, when we were done with that, we came back to the US and I was like, all right, well, what are we going to do now? And I was like, man, I was doing sales and engineering and it was so arduous, the process of sales. And I was thinking about like the sequence and how all this stuff can be
Mhm.
automated. And then someone who was a product manager was like, hey, you should talk to these guys. They're actually building something like that. And it was really just like me looking for like, okay, this needs to be solved. It's also solving the problem that I
Yeah.
had. Right. And so I looked at them like, I've had this problem. I'm empathetic to it. I understand it. This is where the world's going to be headed. Right. And so I think another way to think of it is like, what's that problem you've had that no one's solved yet? That, you've also, a million other people at least have that
Yeah,
same kind
yeah,
of
I think
problem,
seat on
you
any
know?
seat you could take on a rocket ship is better than like the best seat on, a jalopy, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
You should just figure out where your expertise is, and then go figure out the best company you could possibly work for, and then go take any seat at that company.
Yeah. Yeah. And for you, like, so now you're investing in founders, Max. You were an operator. You're still an operator, kind of. I think you run and go-to-market fund, right? So you're an operator slash founder. I would say running a fund. You're still raising money. You're
I'm
still making
doing a
sure.
lot of work. I'm
I-
not. I don't
yeah,
know if
exactly.
I can be considered still an operator, but we have the incubated company operator.ai, and I'm still de
Hmm.
facto CMO for, and like we've got a bunch of other things. So like I am I'm doing a lot more work than just running a fund. We have 2 incubated companies now, um, that I'm kind of part-time-ish at. So yeah, it would kind of be considered.
Yeah. Yeah, you're doing a lot. You're doing a lot. Okay. And so you and I both have been in this go-to-market game for a long time. It's gotten a lot harder than it used to be. I don't know if harder is the good word, but it's changed according to, I would say the era where outreach first came out. You sequence people, you throw people in, you could predict, what you're going to get meeting wise, and then that turns into X pipeline, and that pipeline converts at 30%. Blah 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 blah. You know the whole process, but now it's changed. You're also part of an incubated companies that are trying to like get revenue and all this stuff. So how are you thinking about go to market these days versus how you thought about it like in 2016, 17?
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, I think we're in a period now where people are less eager to buy, because we just went through kind of a little depression and budgets got tightened, and those budgets really haven't expanded yet. So I think there are a lot of people who've only been in the game during the run up, and they're like, well, all the old tactics and everything no longer works. And it's like, no, well, just people in general are not buying everything that they saw before. And like this comes back to the right companies in the investment world. I mean, the 10th best company in a nice to have category was getting a bunch of funding. And now it's like
Mm-hmm.
you have to be a top 3 in a need to have category in order to get past the seed round. And so like, of course things are going to be harder to sell. Of course things are going to be different. Of course things are going to have changed. I do think there are a lot of things that run their course, and that there are plays that we create as an industry that, start to work, and then everybody does them, and then they stop working, and there's a lot of noise. And so now you look at even a company like Outreach, um, or, Sixth Sense or whatever it is, like people are doing these signals, and we used to run these plays before these products existed, where it was like, okay, this company raised a series B, maybe they raised $50 million. You'd go reach out to the VP of sales and you say, hey, congrats on the series B, check out my product, essentially, right? Like that was the gist. And that might have worked when you actually had to go do a lot of work to figure out they raised the series B, to figure out who the VP of sales was, to like go and create that message, and like to know to do that, right? And now everybody, like, that's common practice. Everybody knows the play. They can get the signal very easily, like it's piped right into their Salesforce. And the information on who the VP of sales is also piped right into Salesforce. So now when a company raises a series B, okay, there's 6,000 outreach customers, there's 6,000 Sixth Sense customers, there's 40,000 Zoom Info customers. So like, how many emails is this VP of sales going to get that are like, hey, congrats on the series B, check out my product? And then all of a sudden, now this tactic that worked when 1 or 2 people emailed them, because it was harder to
Mm-hmm.
do, now that it's super easy to do because the technology enables it, the tactic's not going to work, because it's just
Mm-hmm.
noise, and it's
Mm-hmm.
delete. They don't even see it. It's like just another piece of noise, right? So you have to go
Mm-hmm.
past the tactic. And this was why, like, the best stay the best, and everybody else kind of fast follows, and then they end up in this kind of like soup of, okay, cool, like, careers, because they're not really thinking outside the box. Like, they
Mm-hmm.
don't live it, they don't breathe it, they don't go the extra mile to figure out like, okay, well, what's the new play? What's the new thing to do? And there are definitely some people, online who geek out about it to like an entirely different extreme, that honestly like are probably great follows on LinkedIn, that get into the whole weeds on like, what operator is going to do. Clay's doing all these things right now that are new ways to, I think Brendan Short's calling it micro segmenting, things like that, where you can go in and figure out, okay, well, like what are the harder things that I can figure out here, that I'm really one of the only ones that can figure out, that I can put a play together around, that's going to give me more defined messaging to a smaller group of my ICP, that's still a scalable process, but isn't just one big kind of spray and pray or dump or anything like that. So I think Kyle Coleman's another one at Copy AI is posting a lot about this. Jordan Crawford, I think, does it on behalf of Clay. Mark Costello is talking about it a lot on behalf of Operator AI. But I think everybody's trying to figure out, like, okay, like where does this go from here now that buying and
Mhm.
selling has just become a more difficult process in general, and all the stuff everybody
Yeah.
knows is the stuff everybody knows.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I geek out on cold email just because that's the world I come from. And for us, like we're running a bunch of experiments. I think the one that now a lot of people are doing it, but because I put a note out there on we were doing it, and now it's hilarious to see like I get a lot of cold emails of the same stuff I was doing, but it's essentially we do these campaigns cold email wise. Two things. One, every campaign I do is a micro campaign. It's only 2 steps. It's main email, and I treat it like an ad, right? So we're getting into this. That first email is just an ad. And so in that email, I use humor, I use copy. One of my like campaigns has an 8% reply rate. No joke. And like most are positive, right? And people are like, how the hell are you doing that? Because it's treated like an ad with all the same type of components. And then the second email is just a bump to the first. And so if that one doesn't work, then we go back to the drawing board and we send a completely new email like we've never contacted you in the past. Zero personalization, right? And going back to what you were saying, which is interesting, is like now personalization is a commodity. So it's almost when you see personalization now, you know it's AI, you know? So it's kind of like, oh, this is AI, freaking contact me, whatever. Whereas I'm like, okay, well, if everyone's using AI to personalize, I'm not going to personalize at all. I'm going to do the complete opposite. Right. And so now, no personalization at all. Just literally a 2-step email. And it's like, and it works. You know, so going back to that thing is like, my buddy, I have a friend who calls it the tequila test, where he says, like, name a list of like the 10 things everyone else would do, and then look at that list and go, nope, I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to take a shot of tequila. Right. And like, and he's going to do the exact opposite of those things. And so that for me is kind of what I've looked at. And like, that's kind of where I play around, is like, okay, is Sally going to do this? Probably. Is Johnny going to do this? Probably. Okay. Well, let's say something that a lot of people may not like. I do get some responses like, you know, you shouldn't say that type of thing. It's unprofessional. But for every one of those, I get 10 that are like, hey, this is rad. I want
It's
to copy
zigging while
this, you
everybody's
know?
zagging. It's doing the harder thing while everybody's doing the easier thing. Typically, honestly, like um,
Yeah.
I think that's why so many people didn't do it for a very long time. Like everybody knew Bant. Okay, how do you figure out budget? Oh well, like, you know, if a company raises money, right? Like, and then also at the same time, like these seed rounds are probably the easiest round to raise in a very long time. Plus, like a lot of these older companies that raised in 2021, 22 haven't really gone under yet. They're still kind of out there with like their 10 employees kind of in zombie mode. So there's more companies that are
Mm-hmm.
selling, and it's all somewhat incestuous because they're all selling to each other. So there's more companies
Mm-hmm.
also reaching out to like SMB and mid-market companies. So, and you're only really hearing from people like, oh, it's really hard, from companies that are in that space, right? Like you don't have um, public company reps talking about how this is happening with while selling to other public companies. Like I don't think a lot has
Mm-hmm.
changed
Mm-hmm.
there as much as it has set like smaller companies selling to other smaller companies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And are you, so like in my shoes, so we can get tactical here, like I'm selling distribute. We call it like the 1-click follow-ups for sellers. We're in the digital sales room space, right? But like we're more like a Notion versus like a website builder. So a lot different. So what I think the problem that we're having is, um, it's actually interesting. We're getting into some big logos, right? Which is amazing. Don't get me wrong. It's awesome, but it takes time and all that stuff. And I'm having an issue with more of the 50 to 500 employee range. And why that is I don't know. I haven't figured out positioning yet or whatever. But I'm also thinking is that that range, as you mentioned, is the range where everyone's trying to sell into that 50 to 500 range because they're like, that's easy money, quick deal sales cycles and all that stuff. So I'm
Less
like, shoot,
security,
should I
less
even
all
be
that
playing
stuff,
there?
less red tape. It's like,
Yeah.
but also those companies are fighting for their lives from a budget standpoint, and everybody's selling into them because of those reasons. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think you probably get more pickup in higher up, and you probably have to do a little more security and governance and things like that early on in your product, but you might be more successful because it's not as saturated from the sales side.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm feeling, dude. Like I won't say it on here because we're being recorded, but like, yeah, some of these I'm like, shoot, maybe we just do the big enterprise, which I thought it was going to be the separate. We're SOC 2, Type 2, blah, 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 all the fun stuff. Right. But I'm like, shoot, maybe we just play up here because we know we're a great product. We know that we have a use case for these bigger enterprise companies. And we know that like we can probably take out a thing or two in terms of their budget that they're not
It's not a
using
bad idea.
because we're
You just need to
consolidated.
make yourself really good at one thing for the enterprise, because like the wider you
Mm-hmm.
get, the more you do, and then it's like, oh, we're going to add sequencing. Okay, like now you got to attach the inbox. All right, cool. Like you're just opening up a can of worms at that level that you could spend. I mean, at Outreach, we know this. I think we spent like 2 or 3 years of dev resources on enterprise functionality that like not a lot of customers actually saw the fruits of the labor for.
Yeah.
And so like you kind of lose some of the mid
Yeah.
marketers. Like, why aren't you guys innovating more? Why aren't you doing this stuff? And it's like, well, if we want to be a $500 million a year business, you have to start adding
Mm-hmm.
customers that are going to pay you $1 to $10 million a year, and those customers need governance and certain like structured data and certain other things with security that like 500 employee companies just don't need. But 500 employee companies are going to give you a 50 or 100K a year, and you can't build I mean, it's tough. You can, but it's tough to build a big business doing that long term. And HubSpot has, a bunch of others have, but their path was enterprise, and
Yeah.
we'll see if that works for Apollo. Like Apollo went SMB and mid market way, and they're probably
Yeah.
half the revenue of Outreach. So, it was just the way that they decided to do things, but makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes, yeah. So that's what I'm toying with right now. I'm like, okay, maybe we stick up there, we kind of stay up there. And you're right. I think you made a good point that a lot of people make mistakes on, which is, there's kind of like this all-in-one solution vibe that like, oh, we can be all in one, consolidate costs, but then with that, the curse of that is that it's like, well, because you have all these things, I don't get what it is that you actually
Yeah, I
give
mean,
me,
Calendly is a good
right?
example of not being anything more than what you promised you are.
The calendar.
You just and like they've done a really great job, right? So like, and they probably raised more money than they need to raise, and you know, I don't know, good for them. They probably did a lot of secondary, but like, it's a great business. I don't think they have a ton of costs, and like, I don't know. For all I
Mm-hmm.
know, from the outside, it looks like a great business. From the inside, maybe they have all the same issues Outreach had on the, selling the big company side of things. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I am a believer for especially your type of business, like raise one round, never raise again, rip it to 15, 20 million ARR, stay focused on kind of your one thing that you do really well. There'll be a buyer, you'll make a ton of
Mm-hmm.
money, everybody will be happy. Great, good outcome. Right. And then the second you
Yeah.
say, okay, I'm going to raise more money, I'm going to widen, expand the product, and then that all the trickle down effects from that, which happen, which are like, okay, cool, we'll buy this from you, but you need X, Y, and Z. Now you got to go hire the team to build X, Y, and Z and maintain X, Y, and Z. And all of a sudden, like you're upside down in your margins,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a shit show. And then your other customers are like, hey, you forgot about us because you're only focused on these guys now. It's not a fun game.
Yeah. So you said something interesting, which is raise once and then be done. Right. Like, which I think is counterintuitive to what most investors want you to do.
Well,
Or am I
I
wrong in
think
that?
there's different strokes for different folks. Like for this type of business, I would raise once and then be done.
Okay.
And your early investors should be pretty happy. Like,
Yeah.
listen, if you do 2 on 10 or something like that, or 3 on 12 or whatever it is, you give up minimal dilution, you have an option
Mm-hmm.
pool. And if you get pretty far with that, and get to a good place and sell the company for, 150 million bucks or whatever it is. Like early investors get to double, or more
Mm-hmm.
their, 10 or 20x their money. That's fantastic. And you get to walk away with a ton of cash, and everybody you hired, brought on, and that give pretty good equity to, gets to walk away with good money. Like that's a great route. And you don't have to go build a platform. Like there's a such thing as a departmental tool or an organization transforming platform. And at Outreach, we had the second one. We were all about
Mm-hmm.
organization transformation. The ways you did things before are going to be completely
Mm-hmm.
different. It's a platform for your entire organization. And there's a departmental tool. And that you don't need. It's not a platform. Like you just, okay, this is pretty
Mm-hmm.
simple. This is pretty straightforward. We don't need to go raise a ton of money. We don't need to to run it like the other business. That's fine.
Yeah. 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 It's one of my good buddies here in Austin is Adam Robinson, and he's doing RB2B. And we were wake surfing the other day, and the funny thing he was saying, we were talking positioning, and he goes, "Dude, I do website identity. I'm almost at 2 million in ARR. Or I think he's past that now. I think he's almost 3 or something." And he's like, "I'm just going to do that. I'm not going to build a platform. I'm just going to get really good and be the
And they're
best at this website
bootstrapped,
identity."
raised a
And
little
that's
bit.
it.
Like he controls his own destiny.
They just
Yeah,
bootstrap,
for them,
total
they
bootstrap,
don't need to do it.
right?
Exactly.
And it's crazy. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, right? It's like, and it's so, and they got no, 2 million in just website identity, which now there's other players, but they're like slapping it onto their tools and all that fun stuff. But he's still the guy for
Yeah,
website
not
identity,
everybody should
which is
raise
just like,
a boatload of venture capital. It's just not the way to go. And I'll be the first person to say that. Like as a venture capitalist, I mean, we don't want to invest in businesses that want to raise a bunch of money and shouldn't. I'm not talking my book here. Like that's the reality of the situation. Like not everything warrants
yeah,
raising a ton of money. I think one and done rounds are pretty smart.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Have you seen anyone do that successfully? That like recently that are like, okay, we raised once and now they're just like killing it.
No, but it's like kind of like a new thing, and not off the top of my head, but I'm sure
Topic,
they
right?
exist.
Because typically companies, if they raise once, they're gonna go through the
Yeah,
process,
but
right? The seed, the
there's been a
Series
bunch of
A.
companies that raised like I don't know 2 or 3 rounds, too much money. Like post COVID happened, they had the pop, they came back down, and now they're running better businesses now than they ever were. Leaner, running, didn't need the other 2 rounds of funding. If they had to just run it like this, they'd be in a great situation. And the shitty thing is like their preference stack is going to be a high hurdle to clear for them to get a great outcome, but they'll still have a good outcome. I mean, like, it would have been a lot better had they just never raised the other 2 rounds of funding and got caught up in the craziness. But listen, like nobody has a crystal ball. I think if we did have a crystal ball, we all would
Yeah.
have sold our outreach stock in 2021.
I was just gonna say that. I'm like,
unfortunately,
I remember those
I
35.
still have I sold
Yeah.
half. I still have my other half.
You
Yeah,
sold half at the peak? Did you sell
yeah.
at the
It's
peak?
like my blended price is pretty close to the peak. Yeah. So like there were offers on
Oh,
Setter and a bunch of these others for like over the peak, which was great. But yeah, I did. Uh,
thanks for the heads up, dude. Thanks for the heads up, Max. Come on. I'm
yeah.
kidding. I'm kidding.
No, it's not terrible. I mean, listen, I wish it sold it all, or like I am optimistic on the other
Yeah.
half. I think like it'll come back up quite a bit from where it is now, but not probably a very
Yeah.
long time until it's back to where it was, especially beyond the peak. Like our peak was 4.4, but on the secondary markets, it was up to like 5.7, 5.8. So, uh,
It's
yeah,
crazy. Yeah. Yeah. Going back to that, I think I'm shooting myself on the foot, which on that one, right? But again, crystal ball, wish I would have known all that fun stuff. Like,
yeah,
shoot, should have done
I
that.
think a lot of people would have done things differently in 2020, 2021, even before that, even after that. But like, I do, back to the original point, like think the one and done is not a bad thing if your company is in that spot. So
Yeah. Yeah. So going back to the whole go to market on this, like, let's say you have these founders, some that raised at the peak, the ZERP era, right? And they got these crazy valuations, which we all know. Now things are back to normal, right? Or let's call it normal at least. And now they have to grow into these valuations. I'm going to call the elephant out in the room. how do they stay motivated, man? Because now they're like,
There
that's a
are some that are
valuation
giving
that
the
I
money
don't know we're
back.
gonna
There are
hit.
some that are recapping. There are some that are doing pay to play rounds. There are some that are selling to private equity and salvaging what they can for it. A lot that are pivoting, that raised a ton of money early and can pivot until they find something
Yeah.
that's explosive growth again, and hope that they do. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer or one way that prevails. We'll see. I mean, I think there are some good actors and some bad actors and all that. I think there are, a lot of
Yeah.
silly VCs who gave crazy secondaries at like really early stages. And hey, that's not the founder's fault. They played the system to a T. That's fantastic. Good for them. I don't think, like, from a fiduciary standpoint, that does good for anyone. Like, long term, I don't think that bodes well for anybody involved. But hey, like,
Mm-hmm.
everybody took advantage
Mm-hmm.
of the situation that they were in at that time, and uh, you got to take care of yours, right? In those situations. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I was at a point where I was like, man, I should have like raised money earlier, like when it was way easier. Cause I raised last September, right? And we raised like, 1.7 last September, whatever. And when I raised, I was like, man, it was hard. Like into last year, it was just like everyone was like, what's going on? At least for me and my friends, we're like, what is going on? Right. And when we did that, I was like, shoot, I wish I would have raised in 2021 when like people were just giving money away, but then now I'm like, thank God I didn't do that. Right. Like, cause maybe I would have been in a place where I'm in that spot where it's like, holy crap, like, what do? We raised at $100 million valuation or whatever the heck it was. Right. And like, what do you do? So it's kind of a
valuation's
blessing. I'm
one
kind of
thing.
like
The
forced.
amount of money raised is the real killer. Like the if you're going to raise again and you're not going to clear that hurdle, yeah, that sucks. But like the preference stack is where you really get
Yeah.
crushed. Like if you raised 80 million and the highest valuation you raised that at, it's like a $250 million valuation. And then like now your company is only worth like 50 million. Like you're screwed. You're not going to make anything. But if you raised 10 on 100 and your company's
Yeah.
worth 50, it's like, okay, it's a down round or whatever from where you raised last, but at least you pay back your investors and then everybody makes money. So like, it's
Yeah.
not that
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And all right. Well, the one thing I want to get your take on before we head out here too, Max, is something that people ask me. They're like, why do you do all this content? And why do you do all this content out there? And I tell them, I go, dude, because I've always known distribution is king. And I'll tell you that like my thing here is that like every product company was like, okay, we're a product company and now we need to create media and be a media company. Now I think that's flipped where it's like you almost need to be a media company kind of first mindset and like product second, still a great fucking product. Don't get me wrong. Right. But like you need to be thinking about it like that, which really just means distribution is king.
Distribution,
At that point,
I mean,
right?
we have
So
the
like,
Justin Kahn quotes in our deck. It says, first time founders think about product, second time founders think about distribution. Like that, that's just how it goes. I think it's important. I think you should have a great product leads to great distribution, but oftentimes like you still need that GTM muscle. As far as having content and media and whatever else, like there's a lot of different ways to do this right. You can have the community do it for you, user generated content. You could do your own content, bring people on, put people on a pedestal, blah, blah, blah.
yeah.
I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think it's just up to the skill set and like the preference of the founders. But I think it needs to be founder led. I think that's what you're good at. What you do well is like rallying a lot of people around you, doing the media, stuff like that. Lean into your strengths for that. Don't try to be something you're not. And like usually you'll make that work for you really well. It's funny over the years watching all of these SaaS companies always try to create their own communities or try to create their own media brands or whatever. Like they always fall on face because it's like some hired gun that doesn't really care. They're not the heart and soul of the business, and they're going to get a better job, and then they go somewhere else, then it gets handed to somebody else. It doesn't work the same way. It's really got to be, I think, founder led. But
dude, and I will agree with you on that. Just having worked with literally thousands of people on this, founders specifically, is like the ones that make it work are the ones that are doing it themselves. right? And so it's like, you know, my friend Adam, you know, Chris Walker, good buddy of mine as well. Like, same thing is like they all write their own content, right? If you're not doing it yourself and getting in that mindset, it's very difficult to make it work, right? Like, I don't think I've seen anyone that has a ghostwriter for their brand, right? Or that's like just trying to, basic
Yeah.
delegate it all, that's making it actually move the needle. So that's what I tell people, like, how do I get started? And I'm like, you have to start yourself. Like, you have to be the one doing it. And they say, well, I don't have time. And what I tell people is, you don't have time, dude. You're telling me, if I told you to get on stage in front of 1,000 people and say whatever the hell you wanted every single day and slip in your company, you wouldn't want to do that? And they're like, yeah, of course I would. I'm like, that's literally what you're doing. Right. And then they go, oh my God, that's a great point. And so now I think people are starting to see the light a little bit, but I think going back to it, it's not just like, oh, let me do content on LinkedIn, but it sets the precedent top down for like, here's how we're going to think about like distribution, right? Like, and then you get that distribution hat on and you start to think about content, like, why are we putting out this shitty content, and why is this content not have a good hook and all that? So, I'm sure you tell your founders that all the time, but I'm like, look, it's going to be a pain in the ass. It's going to be hard, but once you do it, it's going to make all the difference if you're the one, making it happen. So, but yeah, man. Well, Max, thank you for jumping on, my friend. This has been awesome, dude. And I'll stop the recording. Everyone go check out GTM Fund.